Today I'm testing the Nurvv Run insole against the Polar Grit X and the Stryd footpod. 5.17 miles, 9 minutes, 23 seconds per mile in the Nurvv Run insole, testing it against the Polar Grit X and the Stryd footpod. And spoiler alert, the numbers are a bit different. But before I get into that, I do want to go over some disclosures. The Nurvv Run insoles were sent to me for the purpose of review. And as far as the kind of reference devices that I'm also using, the Stryd footpod was purchased with my own money, and the Polar Grit X was also sent to me for the purpose of review in a prior video. However, regardless of how the devices got to me, no one's paying me to make this video or to include their devices in the video, and no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage or my data before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. Now, the disclosures out of the way, let's see how the Nurvv Run insole did. Now, I've already made a kind of an intro to Nurvv video last week. So if you're trying to figure out what exactly this insole is, check out that video. I'll post a link to it in the description down below, but I know you're not going to click on that anyway. So I'll give you kind of the gist of what this is. It's a bunch of sensors that go under each of your insoles in your shoe. This is for one foot, you get one in the other foot as well. And you run with it and it gives you a bunch of data. And so for me on this particular run, I was able to get pronation and foot strike data, which is something that I've never been able to get from any other sensor before. That's what makes this Nurvv Run unique. And so on this particular run, I got a rating of 55% poor. So I don't know, I think I've always gotten a poor rating from it. I don't know what the other not poor ratings are, but I always get poor. This time I was 55% poor. And then I was able to drill down to see what was going on with my left foot versus my right foot. And on my left foot, that's the foot that I've always seen, and you guys have told me many times that my left foot overpronates like crazy, and the data kind of backs that up. Here, the data said that I had 84% of the time I was overpronating on my left foot. But on the right foot, it said that 95% of the time my foot strike was neutral. So I didn't quite think that I was that neutral on either of my feet, and I didn't think I was quite that much overpronated on either of my feet either. So eye-opening data from Nurvv. That's only one data point in terms of just today's run. So certainly more testing is needed to see just how kind of overpronated I am, but it's interesting data to see nonetheless. I also was able to get foot strike data from today as well. It tells you whether you're a midfoot striker, forefoot, or heel striker. It even breaks it down like on a mile per mile basis, how much of each region of your foot were you hitting. And for me, I was 99% midfoot, which makes sense because today was an easy run day. So everything should kind of fall in right in the midfoot. There were a couple times when I was like heel striking and a couple of times when I was hitting the toes, and I think that those times tended to correlate with when I was kind of in a valley. Not that I was in a valley, but like at the bottom of a hill that led right into an uphill again. Those were the spots where I tended to see a little bit of variation to the extent that there was. But for the most part, I was squarely in the midfoot for today. So not that I'm trying to be one kind of foot striker or another, but it kind of makes sense and kind of supports what I've kind of thought and what it felt like out there too. But also very interesting data for me to be able to keep track of. Now let's get to the data that I can actually compare head to head. So the first thing that I'll look at, I guess though, is the GPS. And that's when you're running with a Stryd footpod and a Polar watch, they have full compatibility. And so what that means is that even though the pace and distance data is coming from the Stryd footpod, the GPS tracing that you see in your maps and on your Polar Flow app are going to be coming from the GPS watch itself. So let's go over what the I'm trying to figure out the best way to kind of like show these head to head without it getting just like too super convoluted with multiple screens going on at the same time. I think the easiest way to do it is for me to we'll go over what's going on in Nurvv, and I'll kind of commentate with that, and I'll show kind of reference images to what the Polar was able to capture. I think that's probably going to be the easiest way to kind of keep things from getting too convoluted. So we make the turn onto Klosterman Road here. Like, this route is pretty simple. It's a couple of lefts. And so we'll make the turn onto Klosterman Road. That's a dirt road. And usually for the dirt roads around here, I try to run straight down the middle because they're usually not that busy, and the roads are pretty pitched. And so if you're running on one side or the other, you're kind of like, you're tilted a little bit. It's a little bit uncomfortable. So I try to run down the middle. If anything, I usually end up running a little bit on the right-hand side. Just old habits die hard. And so that just gives you a reference point. I don't specifically remember which side I was on any one point during this route. But you can see that for a lot of it on the GPS here, I'm just not even on the road. To the left and right on this road is just a ditch on each side and then a bunch of corn. So here it's for the most part pretty close, but then it starts to definitely get pretty far afield from the road. And as we keep going down, and we're going to make the left onto 330th, I think it is, we stay basically, you know, this has me running through the cornfields at this point. Then we make the left at 330th down here, and on this road I usually stay on the left hand side of the road so I could see the traffic coming at me. There's a little bit of a dirt shoulder and road. So sometimes I'll actually run down the middle of the street if it's like a really empty that day. But a lot of times the road does get not busy, but there's enough traffic that I don't really run on this road. There's times I've done it. But on this day, I think I pretty much stuck to the left-hand side, and we can zoom in a little bit more, and you could see that it kind of has me like, you know, going back and forth, like not zigzagging, but kind of like swerving back and forth, which really wasn't what I was doing, although it's not terribly bad in this instance. It does get bad here where it has me like kind of cutting this corner, although I mean, this corner isn't exactly like a 90-degree angle here either, so the map's representation of it isn't exactly right. There is a little bit of a turn to it, but not quite as pronounced as it's showing on this GPS tracing. And then again, once I get to 163rd, I'm usually staying on the left-hand side of the road, and again, there's a little bit of like a shoulder, like a gravel shoulder, and then the road is a little bit pitched, so I kind of bounce back and forth. Sometimes on this road is a lot less traveled, even though it's paved. I will run down the middle of this road sometimes if I want to get like kind of like a me running on the yellow lines kind of shot. But I don't really remember if I was doing that or not. But here it has me like way off the road. I'm never on that side of the road, and I'm certainly not running in the dirt. I mean, there's times where I've had to like, you know, take a pit stop in the fields over there, but that did not happen on this day. And so it has me coming around the curve, still pretty much off the road the entire time here. And I think, though, that's pretty consistent with what I've been seeing, though, in all of the different kind of tracings that I see from the Polar Grid X. So I don't think it's doing a terrible job, although it's not being really like very accurate in terms of exactly where I am. One of the things it did pick up, though, is usually on this curve around here, I will switch sides of the street that I'm on because of the way that the turns are really tight and there's really tall corn still out there right now, so the cars can't see you. So rather than being on the left-hand side so I can see the cars coming, my bigger goal is to avoid surprising a car coming around the turn because I'm worried that it might swerve to get out of the way, and then that could be a problem. So here, right here is right where it accurately picked up that I switched sides of the street, and then it pretty accurately picked up where I went back to the left-hand side of the street. And then we kind of go back to it being like a little bit kind of like pretty close, but not exactly what I was doing. Then as I get back towards town, this is where it starts to get really crazy again. And so like here, I'm running down Main Street. And so it should have me just going straight on along the sidewalk there. So if it was just a little bit kind of north of the street, that'd be correct. But instead it has me going like running in people's, like through people's houses, and that's definitely not right. And then as we make the left to get onto Columbus Street and we get towards the church, that has me going on there pretty accurately. So there are times when I felt like it was a lot less accurate than the Grid X. There was times that I thought it was more, but for the most part, it's pretty much what I would expect to get from a GPS tracing, even in a rural area around here where there aren't any really tall buildings. The church is the tallest building. I've been running that loop for years now, and so it's pretty standard. The usual distance that I got is a little bit short for today. Nurvv gave me 5.17 miles. I had 5.33 miles by the Stryd footpod, and that I think is a little bit more accurate compared to what I've done when I've done like a map my run tracing, which usually has me like at right around the 5.3 miles. And then it depends on, which side of the road were you on? Did I detour a little bit? Was I running in the middle of the road? To the right-hand side, did I have to keep switching back and forth? So like even a mapped version of the run isn't the exact distance traveled. But I feel like the Stryd is super accurate in terms of what I anticipate I should be getting. The Nurvv was pretty close. I would have loved to have been able to run this through the DC Analyzer tool so that we could have seen like the graphs and everything that I'm going to show you like closer and head to head. I can't figure out a way to get the data out of Nurvv, so that's why I have to kind of show it to you guys like this. So I apologize for that. Now that we've looked at the GPS, let's take a look at some of the other metrics that I can compare against some of these devices. So the first one I'll take a look at is elevation. And again, I'll try to show the graphs kind of like superimposed on top of each other the best that I can. They all have different kind of scales and stuff. So I'm not sure how well they're going to fit, but I think they all generally got the gist of kind of the terrain that I was on today, but they all gave me different numbers. And so a lot of times with the Polar and the Stryd combo, like one of the two devices is talking to you. But elevation is one where I actually have a different number in my Stryd Power Center that I have in the Polar Flow. And I also have a different number in the Nurvv app as well. Nurvv gave me a total elevation gain on the day of 217 feet. Polar gave me a total elevation gain of 148 feet, and the Stryd gave me a total elevation gain of 195 feet. So kind of all over the place. Now, I know that a lot of these devices, I think all three of them are barometric altimeters. I'm pretty sure that's what all three of them are. And so a lot of times they'll say like, you know what, you might not be at the exact level above sea level, but like relative heights, like did you climb 100 feet? Did you go down 100 feet? Like that kind of thing, it should be able to nail. And so in this situation, when we're talking about like the relative, like the delta between, different points of elevation, they should be giving me all the same number, but they're all not. And so that was a little bit surprising. Ultimately, not a huge amount, I guess. Like the difference is like the lowest was 148, the biggest was 217. So that's like 60 or 70 feet different, but that's also kind of like 50% more that I got on the Nurvv than compared to what the Polar gave me. So I'm actually not really sure what the elevation is. I've always kind of been using the Polar's data whenever I do an elevation count. So I'm just getting variability there, and I actually don't know. The next data field that I'll look at is cadence. And all of these devices can give me cadence. And so the Nurvv is giving me 175 steps per minute for this, which is, I thought, kind of a little bit high for an easy run. Like in my mind, I was thinking this is probably going to be like 168 to 170, but it gave me 175. The Polar gave me 86, but Polar only counts like every other step. And so you have to multiply that by 2 to get kind of apples to apples number. So you get 172 versus 175. And then the Stryd and Power Center, it also gave me 172. So I'm actually not sure if the Stryd is giving me 172 and pushing that data to Polar, or the Polar is giving me 172 and pushing that data to Stryd, or if they both got 172. I actually don't know on that particular data field. Cadence is not a number that I normally take a look at, but it is a number that I can compare across the devices, so I thought I'd share that. Ultimately, I think that 175 versus 172 isn't a huge deal, because to me it's like 3 steps per minute difference. But I do think though that like if you're training by cadence or trying to get to a certain cadence, that does seem like a big deal to me. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm actually not sure. Step length is another data field that I can compare, and or stride length, like how far does your stride take you between foot strike to foot strike. And in the Nurvv, it gave me 3.15 feet is my stride length, and that converts to 37.8 inches. And in the polar, at least in polar flow, it gave me an average stride length of 39 inches. And now it also breaks that down like by mile, at least the Nurvv does. I wasn't quite able to see a similar like mile by mile breakdown of my stride length. Now I thought that stride length was a metric that the Stryd footpod would measure, but I couldn't find it anywhere in the power center. Maybe I just missed it. And then the last thing that I'll talk about is a metric that I actually couldn't measure, and something that a lot of you guys asked about in my first Nurvv video, which was power. And the Stryd footpod definitely measures power. The Polar Grid X also measures power. The Nurvv doesn't measure power. Although you would think with something that has this many sensors in it underneath your foot, it could measure how much power your foot is putting out in the FAQ. And it does say that it is something that they're looking at to see if they can get these sensors to report power numbers. But as of today, it's not a metric that it can record right now. So right now, the only one that I get, and this is one of those situations when you have the Polar and the Stryd together, it only gives you one of the two devices worth of data. But the number that I have for you today is from the Stryd, and it's 193 watts on average for the run, which puts it power-wise at a very easy run, which kind of correlates pretty well with 9 minutes, 23 seconds per mile. But my heart rate was 140 beats per minute, so that's a little bit higher kind of than it normally should be. My knee's still kind of bothering me a little bit, so I think that's putting a little bit of extra stress on the body and also affecting kind of my output. So that's kind of what's been going on with the Nurvv sensor so far. I'm going to keep testing it because like it's a very peculiar device. Again, I still think that this little like dangling thing that ends up, this scope part sits inside your shoe and this part clips like to the outside. I still think this isn't my favorite kind of way. I wish there was a way they could put all this in here. But it's still a pretty interesting device. I'm going to keep running in it. The next thing that I want to test with this device though is they have this like indoor like foot strike trainer that can help you learn to be more of a mid-foot striker or a forefoot striker. You're only supposed to use it in treadmill mode because they don't want you like looking at your phone, because it's going to give you real-time data as to how your foot is striking these sensors. But I think I'm going to try and use it outside anyway. So that's coming up next. Not right away, but we'll get to that in the next Nurvv run and the next Nurvv video. So hit the subscribe button if you want to see me. I don't know, I'll probably fall at some point, but it should be interesting to see kind of what that looks like. So I'm excited for that. Hopefully you guys are excited for that too. If you have any questions about this or any comments on all this, feel free to put them in the comments down below, but also feel free, I do a live stream every day, 3 p.m. Central Time on YouTube. You can ask me questions and just come and hang out with lots of other runners. A lot of times we talk about running, sometimes we don't. Lately it's been a lot about pizza, some of my favorite shoes, and a lot of cycling. So, you know, it can go anywhere. I'd love to see you guys there and have you guys join in on the conversation. Either way, that's all I got today. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?